before.
Hello.
John Suarez, who is also Cuban, but living in the United States, representing the Cuban Democratic Directory. And we have Diana, and Diana is working with Jarl Hjalmarson Foundation. And Jarl Hjalmarson Foundation is a foundation that works internationally with the moderate party. And the aim for Jarl Hjalmarson Foundation is to promote democracy, human rights, and market economics in the world. And they do a lot of work. Mainly, we have been working in Europe, in the movement of having freedom in Balticum. So that would be Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania. But nowadays, we're working a lot in Latin America and Central America. Not so much with Cuba, though. But it's been increasing during the last years. I had the opportunity to visit Cuba some years ago, but that was a joint movement with the Christian Democratic Party. The Liberal Party and the Christian Democratic Party in Sweden have been working with Cuba opposition for a long time. But the Moderate Party, who's the largest party in the alliance, who's a spokesperson for freedom, needs to be in Cuba. And now you're here to tell us the story about Cuba. We have all been, haven't you, been looking at the television and seeing the pictures of Cuba. The lovely beaches, high palm trees, the sun, you know, the turquoise water, the nice fishes, beautiful music, and those old nice cars. Did you see it? Yeah, it looks so cool. But now you're going to tell us the truth. Why do you have those old cars? For example. So, very welcome. This is students at the university or people in a young age working. But mainly we are the new generation in Sweden who are very much involved in freedom and democracy and human rights. So we are very pleased to meet you. And I know for a fact these guys have a bunch of questions. So then I will ask them, and I will see that when you raise your hand, I will see that you will be having time to ask your questions. But now I will give the floor to you, because you're the ones who invited. Someone asked me about the time, how long we would keep going, and there is a person that needs to go. And that is not that he's tired or anything, he just has another appointment. But that's all right. When you have to go, you have to go. But otherwise we will be having about an hour and a half or so.
Yes. Okay.
So, yeah, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, and I'll sort of give like a general introduction of where we are over the past 6 months, what's been taking place in Cuba. There is a human rights situation which continues to be grave and in fact has deteriorated. Amnesty International has identified 6 new prisoners of conscience over the past 2 months. On August 5th of 2013, the human rights organization demanded the immediate release of 5 Cuban activists, Rafael Matos Montes de Oca, Emilio Planas Robert, and their brothers Alexis Diango and Diango Vargas Martin. On September 12, 2013, Amnesty also recognized Ivan Fernandez de Pestre as a prisoner of conscience. The Council of Human Rights Rapporteurs in Cuba has identified dozens of Cuban political prisoners. Thousands of detentions of nonviolent activists exercising their fundamental rights have also taken place in the island over the past 6 months. There were more than 700 detentions documented in Cuba in the month of September alone. Neither of these 2 new developments are new in Cuba, but as part of the established patterns of repression. However, there are new developments that point to a disturbing escalation in violence. Ofelia Acevedo, human rights defender, Osvaldo Payar's widow, addressed the United Nations Human Rights Council September 17, 2013 and stated, "My family has received death threats and my children have suffered physical persecution by Cuban state security of the Cuban government in the streets of Havana. Violence against the members of all the opposition grows in the country. Less than 3 months ago, Orlando Leiva of the Christian Liberation Movement was attacked with a machete on a public street because of his nonviolent work in favor of the plebiscite and human rights in the island. Orlando, who's a father of 3, may never recover total mobility in his right hand. Orlando, who is a father of 3, may never recover total mobility in his right hand. There have been other incidents involving activists being attacked by regime agents wielding machetes. This seems to be a new and disturbing pattern when taking into consideration the escalating violence against female human rights defenders that has included beatings with blunt objects and a disfiguring knife attack in late 2012. Taking all this into account and the suspicious deaths of human rights defenders such as Lara Poyantolev on October 14th of 2011 and Osvaldo Paya and Harold Cepero on July 22nd, 2012, just to name 2 high-profile cases, the future for activists in Cuba is ominous. Edith Pérez Aguilera, who's here to my left, addressed the United Nations Human Rights Council during Cuba's Universal Periodic Review on September 20th, 2013, just last month, and denounced the violence and threats visited upon her, stating, "I've been the victim of aggressions on the part of the Cuban authorities, especially by the agents Yumiel Monteagudo Reina and Eric Aquino Yera. They have beaten me into unconsciousness in the pavement, as took place most recently this past March 7th in Santa Clara. The hits to the head, neck, and back have caused me serious health problems that I have not been able to recover from. In addition to beating me, they have threatened me with death on various occasions. These agents have told me that they're going to rape me and have shown their genitals during arbitrary arrest." She also denounced the suspicious death of a former female political prisoner who was not well known. Daisy Talavera Ortiz, an activist in Matanzas, died run over by a car in January of 2011. Women human rights defenders in Cuba suffer homes under siege, aggressions against their young children, and the arbitrariness of the government that has remained in power for 54 years. Human rights defenders are being brutalized, they're suffering death threats, dying under suspicious circumstances over the past 4 years in a new and disturbing pattern. Sadly, the international community, rather than addressing these disturbing trends, are instead discussing whether the regime switching controls from the infamous white card to new controls on the issuing of passports and permitting more travel after January 2013 is substantial change. The fact that the representatives of the ladies in white in Europe, Blanca Reyes, requested an entry permit to her homeland on July 22nd, 2013 to see her father, who is 93 years old and very ill and lives in Santi Spiritus, Cuba, and was denied, should dispel any illusions that the right of Cubans to travel inside and outside of their country has been restored. It is still defined by the whims of the dictatorship. The answer written in the blood of Cuba's human rights defenders is that the regime's violent and murderous underlying nature has not changed at all. The body count of over a half-century continues to rise, and apologists for the regime still celebrate the dictatorship. This is why it is so important to listen to the testimonies of both Jorge Luis Garcia Perez Antunes and Edith Pérez Aguilera, who are with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Should we start with you, Josh?
Si quieres
Luis.
empezar.
Yes.
Sí, bueno, antes que todo, buenas noches, buenas tardes ya.
For everything, good evening.
Estamos muy satisfechos de estar acá.
We're very satisfied to be here.
Hay un dicho que dice que la primera y la última emociones son las que quedan.
They're saying that the first and last emotions are the ones
Esta
that
es nuestra
stay with you.
última actividad
And this is our last activity
en este país,
in this country.
porque en las próximas horas partimos, regresamos a Madrid.
In the next few hours, we're going to be returning to
Y bueno,
America.
no podíamos regresar, no sin antes reunirnos con el sector más importante y más sensible de una sociedad,
We could not return before meeting
para
the
nosotros
most
es
important
prioridad.
sector of society, which are the
sobre
students,
todo la juventud.
especially the youth.
Mi esposa y yo
My wife and I
concluimos un largo periplo por acá por Europa,
are completing today a long
donde hemos estado
travel
tratando de llevar la verdad que ocurre en nuestro
where
país.
we've been trying to take the truth of what is happening in our country.
Para nosotros la visita acá en Europa
The visit here in
es
Europe
muy importante
has been very important
por muchas razones.
for a number of reasons.
Sabemos cuántos millones
We know how many millions
gasta el régimen en el país
the regime spends in my country
para vender una falsa imagen de lo que ocurre en Cuba.
to send a false image of what takes place in Cuba.
Sabemos cuánto esfuerzo hace
We know how many efforts they are engaged in
para que imágenes despreciables como la de Ernesto Che Guevara
that horrible images like those of Ernesto Che Guevara,
una persona que tanto daño, dolor, muerte ha ocasionado,
a person who has caused so much pain and death and suffering,
no solo en Cuba, en América Latina, sino en muchas partes del mundo,
not only in Cuba and Latin America, but in other parts
han
of the
logrado
world,
que muchos jóvenes, de manera o desconocimiento,
that many youth, unaware,
le hagan panegírico a esta triste imagen y a esta triste persona.
to use this image as an icon.
Se lo digo a ustedes y comienzo por acá,
And I say to you, and I begin here,
porque también yo fui joven al igual que ustedes.
because I was young as you are.
Cuando tenía 25 años
When I was 25 years old,
fui a prisión
I went to
y
prison,
tuve que permanecer por 17 años
and I spent 17 years in
en
prison,
tenebrosas celdas de castigo,
in horrible punishment cells,
sufriendo palizas, golpizas, torturas.
beatings, and tortures.
Me asustaron los perros,
They threw dogs at me.
me troncharon mi anhelo de estudiar también. Yo quería ser abogado, quise ingresar a la universidad.
They eliminated my abilities to study. I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to go to
A
university.
diferencia de ustedes, no pude hacerlo,
Unlike you, I was unable to do that.
porque en mi país para ingresar a estudios superiores hay que tener el mismo color político del rey.
Because in my country, to be able to enter higher academic
En mi
studies,
país
you
no
have
se
to have the
puede,
same political color.
no se puede discrepar.
In my country, you cannot disagree.
Disentir de la política oficial, eso es delito y se paga caro.
You cannot dissent from the official political line of the regime. And
Dichoso
to do
yo.
so you have to pay a high price.
Dichoso yo que pude pagarla con 17 años.
I was very lucky that I only had to pay it with 17
Otros no
years.
hicieron el cuento, como se dice en buen cubano.
Others were not able to tell their story.
Otros pagaron con su vida.
Others paid with their life.
Les digo eso a ustedes
I say that to you,
y les quiero hablar lo más directo y claro
and I
posible,
want to speak as directly and
porque
clearly as
ustedes son el motor de la sociedad.
because you are the motor of society.
Ustedes son el relevo,
You are the ones who will relieve a new
pero
generation.
sobre todas las cosas son el ala más romántica,
And you are the most romantic wing,
más sensible
most sensible,
y la más fácil de manipular.
and the easiest to manipulate.
Y disculpen que le digo esto, pero
And
este
I
régimen
apologize for saying that, but this
utiliza la inocencia de la juventud y de la
uses
niñez
the innocence of youth and of children
para convertirlos en promotores
to turn them into promoters
de estos crueles sistemas totalitarios.
of these cruel totalitarian systems.
Ustedes han escuchado hablar de la playa de Varadero,
You have heard speak of the beach of Varadero.
ustedes han oído hablar de las playas del Caribe,
Maybe you've heard of the beaches in the Caribbean,
del turismo en la isla,
of tourism in the island.
ustedes han oído hablar de que en Cuba la salud es gratuita, de que es para todos,
You may have heard that in Cuba healthcare is free,
ustedes han oído hablar de que en Cuba es un país lleno de justicia social,
that it's for everyone, and that Cuba is a country filled with
y vengo
social
aquí
justice.
a decirles que eso es mentira.
And I come here to tell you that that's all a lie.
En Cuba solo son personas los turistas
In Cuba, only tourists are people,
y los gobernantes.
and the governing class.
Es cierto que Cuba es una potencia médica,
And it is true that Cuba is a medical power,
pero no es para mí ni para ella,
but
ni
not
para
for
él,
me
que
or
somos
her,
cubanos,
for the Cubans.
sino son para los turistas
They are for the tourists
y son para los gobernantes.
and for the governing class.
Una prueba de ello es que mi esposa, de golpizas que le dieron,
My wife, from beatings that she has
estuvo
suffered,
ingresada en el hospital, la expulsaron de allí.
when she was admitted to a hospital, she was expelled from the hospital
Su manera de pensar,
for what she thinks
y
politically.
en estos momentos está quejándose todavía
And at these moments,
de lesiones en la columna.
from lesions in her vertebra.
Esto que ustedes ven acá es increíble.
This what you see here is
Tuve que
incredible.
regresar, o sea, tuve que venir a Estados Unidos para enterarme que tenía una fractura en una mano.
I had to come to the United States to show that I have a fracture,
Esa
to learn that I had a fracture.
Me la fracturaron por atreverme a salir a las calles a rendirle tributo a un mártir.
My bone was fractured for daring to go.
Quiero
to
que
the
sepan que
street
muchas de las
to a
cosas que
martyr.
ustedes logran hacer,
I want you to know that many of the things that you're able to
esto que
do,
estamos haciendo aquí en estos
this is
momentos,
what we're doing at this
en
moment.
mi país constituye un delito,
In my country, this would be a
motivo
crime.
suficiente para que entren fuerzas represivas y golpeen a diestra y siniestra.
This would be sufficient motivation for
Y podamos
repressive
ir
forces to
a la
come here
cárcel.
and beat us up and for us to go to prison.
Yo, a diferencia del régimen comunista, no vengo a adoctrinarlos,
I, in contrast to the communist regime, did not come to indoctrinate.
no vengo a hablar de que tengo la verdad absoluta,
I'm not coming here to say I had the absolute
pero
truth.
sí quiero demostrarle con hechos que Cuba es una dictadura.
I want to demonstrate with actions and with facts.
Vengo a hablar de que en Cuba hay un régimen que lleva 50 y tantos años en el poder, no ha habido nunca una elección.
There's a regime that's been 54 years in power. There's never been.
Tengo 49 años que cumplo hoy mismo, estoy cumpliendo 49 años y aún no he podido ver una elección,
And I've never been able to see a free
aún no
election.
se me ha dado la oportunidad de elegir un presidente.
I've never had the opportunity to elect a president,
y aún no he visto la posibilidad de que mi país pueda tener que pueda expresarme libremente.
and I have not seen the possibility to express myself freely in my
Sé que
country.
ustedes viven en una sociedad próspera, digna.
I understand that you live in a prosperous and dignified country.
Sepan que si algún día van a Cuba,
I know that if someday you go to Cuba,
traten de ver la verdadera Cuba real,
try to see the real Cuba,
no esa Cuba virtual,
not the virtual Cuba.
que muchos jóvenes, al igual que ustedes,
So many youth, just like you,
jovencitas, se tienen que prostituir su cuerpo
in Cuba, many youth have to
en el malecón de La Habana, en cualquier lugar de Cuba,
or
por un desodorante,
for deodorant,
por un tubo de pasta,
for toothpaste,
por una ropa interior,
for underwear,
que cualquiera de las ropas que ustedes pueden vestir o cualquier celular que ustedes tengan en su mano.
or for any clothes that you're wearing. Or
Muchos jóvenes en mi país tienen que robar,
many
ir a la
in the country
cárcel,
have to steal, go to prison.
que la edad que tienen ustedes, mientras ustedes estudian, muchos jóvenes en mi país arriesgan su vida en el mar para alcanzar la libertad.
At the year and now at the age that you're studying, many youth in my country are risking
Muchos jóvenes de su edad y menores que ustedes descansan en el fondo del mar
Many young people, younger than yourself,
por ese anhelo de libertad,
at the bottom
por vivir en el país que ustedes viven.
for wanting to live in the kind of country you live in.
Reitero, tuve que pagar 17 años de cárcel por querer vivir en
I
libertad.
had to pay 17 years for wanting to live in freedom.
He sufrido torturas las más despiadadas,
I've suffered some of
se me han asustado perros,
tortures. They've thrown dogs at me.
oficiales de la policía amenazaron con un revólver a mi madre, ocasionándole la muerte.
Officials of state security threatened my mother with a
He sido
handgun.
golpeado, apaleado.
To her death, I've been beaten and
Tengo en mi cuerpo muchas huellas de las torturas,
I have
estas marcas que ustedes ven
these marks
en mi mejilla, así como heridas por
on
acá,
the face and around.
son de perros que me han asusado.
They're from dogs that have been set loose on me.
El rey de mi país asesina y mata.
The regime in my country assassinated
Una noble e inocente mujer llamada Laura Boyán
a
Toledo
noble and innocent woman. They
fue mordida por rabiosos y no fueron perros, o sí fueron perros,
people.
pero hombres de la policía política que la mordieron.
They were men of the political police who bit them,
Yeah, I think he, yeah.
Luego le ocasionaron la muerte en un hospital
and it later caused her death in a hospital.
por pensar diferente y por pedir cambios
For asking
en la Constitución. Un hombre como Osvaldo Payá Sardiña
a man like Osvaldo
y un joven nombrado
Harold Cepero,
Harold Cepero lo asesinaron en una carretera desconocida de La Habana.
murdered on an unknown road in Havana.
Sobre nuestra seguridad física y nuestra vida corre peligro cuando regresemos a Cuba.
Our personal safety is in danger when we return.
Sabemos que es difícil convencer de pronto a la juventud de lo que pasa en mi país,
We know that it's difficult to convince the youth of what happens
porque el régimen de mi país es poderosísimo en la propaganda.
because the regime in my country is
Los
powerful.
regímenes totalitarios se ufanan en justicia social
The
y no la
totalitarian
tienen.
regimes claim to have social justice, but they don't have it.
En mi país la mayoría de las madres tienen que dormir con el desgarrador dolor de no tener una merienda que haga a sus hijos el día siguiente.
Mothers in Cuba have to sleep in the painful knowledge that they don't have even a snack for their child.
En mi país los médicos ganan $20 al mes.
In my country, doctors get $20 a month,
Sin embargo, los zapatos a sus hijos les cuestan 10, 15, 20 y $30.
but to get a pair of shoes for one of their children is $10 or $15.
En mi país los alimentos son muy racionados.
In my country, food, nutrition is rationed.
4 libras de azúcar le dan a cada persona al mes, le corresponde.
4 pounds of sugar a month for each.
La otra que la consiga por otra vía clandestina.
You find that if you need to get more, you need to get it through some other means or clandestine.
Arroz, ¿cuántos libras dan al mes? 5 libras de arroz.
5 pounds of rice a month.
En mi país hay un verdadero apartheid.
In my country, there is a serious apartheid.
En mi país comer langosta es delito.
In my country, to eat lobster is a crime.
Comer camarón es delito.
To eat shrimp is a crime.
En mi país somos los únicos ciudadanos en el mundo que no podemos viajar.
We're the few citizens that are not able to
Es la
travel.
primera vez que cubanos pueden hacerlo.
It's the first time the Cubans are able to travel.
Y si hoy, y creo que es la pregunta, el tema importante que se impone, si hoy estamos aquí,
If we are here today, and this
si hoy por primera vez conozco un mundo fuera de mi
for
país,
the first time I know a world outside of my
no es por
country,
humanidad ni benevolencia del sistema,
it's neither for the humanity or benevolence.
es simple y llanamente por una sucia maniobra política
It's because of the dirty political manipulation
para blanquear su sucia imagen ante el mundo,
to whitewash their dirty image around
para
the world,
confundir a personas como ustedes
to confuse people like
de que el
yourself,
régimen de La Habana se está humanizando.
that the regime of Havana is humanizing.
No se está humanizando.
It is not humanizing itself.
Este señor joven
This young man,
se llama Iván Fernández de
his
Pérez.
name is Ivan Fernandez de Pérez.
Este joven está sancionado a 2 años de privación de libertad
He is sanctioned to 2
porque
years
salió a la calle
for going out into the street
a una iglesia
to a church
para rendirle tributo a un
to
mártir.
pay homage to a Cuban martyr.
So what, repeat, he's sentenced to 2 years in prison.
He sentenced 2 years in prison for taking part in a pilgrimage to a church to pay homage to a Cuban martyr.
Yeah. Did you hear? Okay.
A martyr of what? A un mártir de qué?
A un mártir de Cuba, por ejemplo, ¿cómo se llama la tumba que me enseñaste ahí? Gustav. Por ejemplo, ahora ellos dos salen con la ropa al revés para rendir tributo a Gustav y el régimen lo sanciona a 2 años de libertad porque para marchar, para pedir, para hablar hay que contar con el régimen. Y este joven salió para pedir homenajear a un mártir nuestro que se llama Frank País, que está pagando 2 años de privación de libertad. Este matrimonio opositor es una dama de blanco que por ir a la iglesia cada domingo para pedir la libertad de los presos políticos le tienen 10 años de privación de libertad. Se llama Sonia Garro Alfonso.
Her name is Sonia Garro Alfonso.
Pero miren este caso.
And look at this case.
Esta joven se llama Damaris Moya Portieles.
The young woman there is Damaris Moya Portieles.
Esa joven en menos de un mes le han asaltado su vivienda.
They've assaulted her home.
La han golpeado a ella y a sus hijos.
Beaten her and her children.
Ven esa pequeña inocente.
You see that small
O a
child?
esa niña la amenazaron con violarla sexualmente.
They threatened to
El oficial aquí no llega.
The official Eric
Aquí no llega. Y no me crean a mí. Busquen en YouTube, en la página del directorio democrático, para que vean el desgarrador testimonio de esta
You
mujer.
can hear her testimony firsthand.
Diciendo,
Saying,
pero nada, las cosas no terminan ahí. Esta muchacha le introdujeron en una celda un lapicero por su vagina para supuestamente buscar un teléfono celular.
okay, while she was in prison, they introduced a pencil into her vagina to search for a supposed cell phone.
And why is she in prison?
¿Y por qué estaba en la cárcel?
¿Quién?
Damaris.
No, Damaris no está en la cárcel.
Pero pero tú estás diciendo que estaba en una celda con
En la celda.
¿Y por qué estaba en la celda?
No, no estaba en cárcel, estaba en celda.
She was in a cell.
Nosotros los opositores cubanos somos constantemente arrestados, llevados a calabozos.
Are constantly arrested and constantly jailed.
En la cárcel están ellos dos y ella. Ella no está en la cárcel.
These three are jailed. She's currently at her home. But they still do...
Esta joven...
Pero espera, para aclarar. Pero a ella